One of the things that I've seen misinterpreted by the media and some of your detractors is your teachings on illness and disease. Because I have never, having listened to you present for 8 years, I have never heard you present on illness as disease as being a punishment or a form of vengeance against you for having committed ill wrongs. What I have heard you present time and time again is that illness and disease is a correction. Now I understand that if you look at life in the terms of one life, that doesn't make a lot of sense. But if you really ponder on one life, a lot of things don't make sense. I mean, why is it, for example, if the Christian teaching was true to its, that you had to align to Jesus in order for him to rescue you from your sins? Well, what happens to all those millions of people that, number one, were born after his time, but number two, were born before his time, and number three, those people that never even get to know that he existed? The teaching as a teaching in terms of humanity as a whole doesn't make a lot of sense. And a lot of the way that religion is taught, it's very separative in the fact that there is often a condition on it where it doesn't make sense to humanity as a whole. So just coming back a step, you talk a lot about reincarnation. And I just wondered if you can expand upon that in terms of the role of illness and disease in terms of reincarnation.
Look, illness and disease, as horrible as they are when we're struck by an illness or a disease, they are corrections, and they're needed corrections, but they're also stop moments. They're moments of reflection and moments of pondering. They offer us something, and they offer the possibility that the arrogance that we run with, the arrogance that we can do whatever we like to the body and get away with it, needs to be reconsidered. And what we're not considering is that the body is the marker of all truth. And the body is the vehicle that actually teaches you where you stand in evolution. So the body that you carry around with you is the tool by which you have conscious awareness of where you are in terms of evolution. So if you're walking around in misery, and if you're walking around with a lower sore back, if you're walking around with some form of depression, if you're walking around with bad knees, if you're walking around with multiple metastases of cancer, etc., then you have to look at how you've been conducting that body, and we return to movement. How have your movements been? How have you been living? How have you been behaving? What have been your food choices? And for a lot of people who don't consider the body as their temple, let's say, for want of a better expression, or the vehicle through which they can bring divinity onto earth, and then they abuse that body, then the corrections have to be educational. You know, like, you just overate, you throw up. You overdrank, well, you're going to experience a hangover. You keep drinking, well, you're going to have a liver problem. It's not that it's punishment. I see it more as a correlation that we don't like to be aware of. Like, it's very, very simple. You drank too much, you are going to have a hangover. What is your body saying? That you can just do whatever you like, or is your body saying, don't overdo it? And that's how we have to look at it. And it's very, very simple. We don't have to make it very complex, because it's actually very simple. The body is the marker of truth, and it's there showing you how you're living.
It is a very simple teaching. Something that has always fascinated me with the whole evolution story, that is a theory that we come from the apes, that we come from the animal kingdom, is that when you look at the human body and the human being and the way they treat their body, there is no other example in nature of that level of abuse. And yes, there's examples. No one knows why lemmings jump off cliffs, they commit suicide. So there is examples of suicide in nature, for example, but not to the degree that we have that problem in society. The fact is that when you look at, for example, there's a classic story I've told before of a documentary on a tiger, and it had 3 cubs. Now the tiger got a thorn in its foot. Now, if that was a human being, a lot of us would probably even be able to disregard it, get on with the day, do what we've got to do before we pulled the thorn out of our own hand. The way the human being is, it doesn't make sense to the way the animal kingdom looks after their body. And there's a certain rhythm that we go into which comes back to movement as again in the way that we go about our lives that is completely disregarding. And I've heard you talk about anxiety as simply being a rhythm of the way we breathe. And for a long time I didn't understand that because maybe I'm more honest than some, but I've dealt with anxiety for most of my life. And I would dare say that most people, if they sat and were still, would realise that there's a low-grade anxiety that they carry. My first experience of that was when I was 26 and I did my first meditation and I couldn't be still. And I thought there was something wrong with the meditation technique. All I was doing was watching my breath. What I realised very quickly was, no, that's my permanent state of being. And what you talk about in relation to illness and disease is beautiful in the sense that it helps us develop a different relationship with life. And if I may give a classic example of that in my own case, at 17 I got chronic fatigue. Now at the time I thought that was devastating to my life. But what I realised looking back was it was the exact correction I needed to stop me from going even further down the rabbit hole of disregard, where I could have ended up, who knows where I would have ended up. Before that, I was punishing my body beyond belief. I was training twice a day, going to university, holding down a job, living a life of complete excess, not in the terms of drugs, but in the terms of the levels of exhaustion that I was constantly putting my body into every day. Now, as human beings, we've got all the answers. You have coffee, you have a pick-me-up drink, there's ways and means that we deal with our exhaustion, but at what price on the other end? And then suddenly we wonder why we wake up with chronic fatigue. But what I learnt from that experience was to have a certain level of respect that's nowhere near the level of respect I have today for my body. But back then, there was a lesson for me in how to actually listen to my body. Because before that, my body was a machine and that's how I treated it.
Yeah, that's a very good example, and I'm pleased that you're sharing that with whoever is going to watch this interview. But that's an attitude that you have developed and grown to learn, and you're much more understanding of the situation, therefore you can learn, or you can look back at it with a completely different point of view and feel sorry for yourself for having missed out on your life because you had chronic fatigue at the age of 17, 19 or whatever it was. Illness and disease are corrections. They're showing us what we're doing and what we're not doing. And with respect to evolution, they're teaching us that we are here to not only not choose, but also discard what we have chosen in the past. And it's an overall package that is basically saying we have the right to choose. So let's be super wise and very loving about that blessing that we're graced with. And it's not just an ability to say, I can do whatever I like. We live in a situation where we are under coexistence and we have the power to do whatever we like, but it's actually not the power to do whatever we like. Power is to understand that we live in accordance to harmony. Real power is understanding that you are choosing to be part of something that is one unified. Real power is the exercise to not be individual, but to be part of brotherhood. Real power is knowing that you don't have to be found and identified and acknowledged as an individual, that you can actually belong to a larger group and still be found within that. And that foundness is within the oneness, and that foundness is within the brotherhood and not as individuals. And that's what we're here to learn, and that's what evolution is all about.
Amazing. So what you're essentially talking about is harmony. When you talk about power, it is with respect to being harmonious to everything around us.
Yeah, true power is the ability to understand that you belong to the universe, that you belong to something, as I said earlier, that is a oneness. And I feel that I know it's a huge drop away from that power to go and seek something for yourself. As you mentioned in a previous interview between us, where a person has to look in the mirror and say, I'm beautiful, and repeat it over many, many times. Well, if you're doing that, you're already in separation to the fact that you're beautiful. So you have to, resurrect yourself back into something by repetitive action, instead of just saying, I'm part of the beautiful, I'm part of everything that is beautiful. And this is how I represent that part that is part of the all.
So you talk a lot about movement, and you talk about movement as being the answer, if you like, to so many of the ills that we carry. If you're in a position where you're over here and you are completely disregarding of your movements, no idea, never listen to an esoteric teaching, you come in fresh, like most you're doing the normal, what you'd call living a normal life, but you kind of understand it's not quite working for you. There's a level of exhaustion you can't get on top of. There's a level of overwhelm in the sense of everything going around you. You can't just magically somehow create a movement that on its own is going to somehow resurrect you, because you've got this momentum, this huge momentum of choices that can go back past one life. There has to be a bridge between getting to a point where you create a movement that it's in itself creates a momentum that is different, and from getting out of the movement that you're in and being able to resurrect yourself to that. Is that what you call self-love?
Yes, one of the mechanisms of self-love is that. And within what you've presented, Adam, is also the understanding of reincarnation and illness and disease with regard to the science of momentum. Because we have to look at the fact that sometimes there are two types of illness and disease. There's the one where you are experiencing a correction due to the excesses. In other words, you've just gone over the top and your body needs to bring a correction so that you basically stop doing that movement that is creating havoc not only in your body but in effect to other people by the ripple effect. But there's also, and this is harder to understand, and it requires much more the science, the understanding the level of responsibility. Let's say I do correct my life. Let's say I look after myself deeply and I've changed myself to much more gentle, delicate, fragile, open, vulnerable, self-loving, self-caring, self-nurturing way. What happens if I suddenly get cancer as a result of that? So I live 20 years of self-love, self-nurturing, very loving, very vulnerable, very loving person, open, communicative, not holding back, open with everybody, very trusting. I tick all the boxes and suddenly I get cancer. Is that a failure? Well, most people will turn around and say, well, I did everything right and here I am getting cancer just like everybody else. But what they don't realize is that they have a momentum to clear. There's a correction there. There's a rebalancing. They haven't always lived that way. And we need to also look at that term of illness, be it cancer, be it chronic fatigue, be it whatever it is that we get in that instance after that clean bill of health or clean living or movement in the correct way. We need to understand that we haven't always done that. And sometimes the past has to come and correct itself. And that's why we need to embrace immortality. We have to understand that even death is a process of healing, and as is birth. And we have to approach both with full commitment right to the very end. And we need to understand life as a one big infinite package and stop trying to look at it in this most linear, segmented way, because no one presents a model that actually fits, that actually makes sense. And when you start to enlarge it and present it as a model that is eternal, that's when it makes sense. And that's when responsibility takes on a completely different meaning, and so does love. Because if I love you in this life, and truly love you in this life, I'm not just loving Adam, I'm training myself, for want of a better word or a better term, training myself to love others. So I'm going to come back and reincarnate, and love for me will be easy. Why? Because I got to love another human being. But if I hold back on you, if I don't trust you, if I lace you with mistrust because another person has hurt me, I'm also training myself to reincarnate, to also have that mistrust, to also be non-vulnerable, to also be protective, to also not love, etc., etc. And that's the beauty of reincarnation, responsibility, love, and the beauty, grandfather of all, evolution.
So that's quite profound, because you've really brought two paths in a reincarnation, even though it's the one path. in the sense that if we lived a life from understanding of reincarnation, you could actually use reincarnation to keep the momentum of your patterns going, if you like. But what you're presenting to, which I don't think is always understood, is that there is a positive, for want of a better word, to reincarnation, in the sense that you can set up a momentum that is completely different, where you can start to use momentum to actually truly evolve yourself back to our true divine state, rather than using reincarnation as a form of correction.
Yeah, I want to reincarnate and be blessed by my choices of my previous lives, not be burdened by the choices of my previous lives. Now imagine if we understood life like that. Imagine if we actually responsibly sat down and considered the possibilities that we can actually live in a way that guarantees that when you reincarnate, you will have that momentum versus the one that is in disregard and easy to dismiss people and mistrust and not be in good relationships, but actually come back and know how to truly love, how to actually be in family, how to be a proper lover, how to be in relationship with everybody, etc. What are the possibilities if this was actually how it is? And that's what I'm presenting. I'm presenting the fact that reincarnation is a very, very positive thing, and it's needs to be taken from the point of view of responsibility, and definitely not ignored, because whether you like it or not, you're coming back.